Hey everyone, in this video I want to show you some more data analysis where we'll take our data from an Excel spreadsheet, which you can download from the description, and what we'll do is we will make a graph where each of the units produced according to the shift has a bar chart according to the date. So a manager could look and see the day and see how many units were produced on each shift on that day. Let's get started. So we'll do this inside of WayScript. We'll create a new layer. We will say graph analysis and create this. If you have a WayScript account, feel free to clone this. The link for that clone will be in the description. So you can follow along using that, or you can create this from scratch with me. So getting started, what we'll do is we will first create our requirements.txt, since we'll be using Python to do the majority of this. For this example, we'll be using Pandas. Then we'll have open pyxl, which is a Pandas dependency. And finally, we'll be using matplotlib to create our graphs. Once we have all of this, we'll need to create our Python script. We will say graphs.py. We'll say graphmaker.py. And next, what we'll need is our data. So we can either have a data source, such as an SQL database. In this example, I have a Excel spreadsheet, so I will pull that in. Dragging and dropping that. You see it takes a second to upload, but once that finishes uploading, we can now use it. So getting started, what we will first do is there's a few dependencies I will just copy and paste over. You see that we're using pandas, and we have matplotlib.pyplot as PLT. Now that we have those, what we will need to do is create a data frame. We'll call it df, then pandas.read excel, and then the path to our Excel file. We're using sample report data. So sample report data. It is case sensitive, so we'll need to make sure that we type that in correctly. I believe we have it here. And now we can access the data from this Excel workbook. Once we have this, what we'll need to consider at this point is what kind of data we want to extract from this workbook. So what we want to do, in my case, is we want data from each day and from each shift. So what we'll need to do is we will say something like a grouped data frame. So GDF will be equal to DF, our original data source, group by, we'll pass in a list here of shift and date, and then we'll say sum. So what we're saying here is we want to group all of our information of shift and date, and with all the other columns, we want to sum them up. So we'll group all of our data on date and shift, and then this column will be summed up. But there is also an employee ID column, and this will be summed as well. So let's drop that column from our grouped data frame now. To do that, we'll say GDF is equal to GDF. There is a method called drop, and what this does is takes in a keyword argument of columns where we can pass in a list, and we can drop whatever columns we want. In this case, we just need to drop one, which is employee ID, so this will work just fine. Our next step will be to plot this graph. So GDF, we'll say plot, and we have a few arguments that we can pass in here. To save a little bit of time, I've already typed these up, and I will paste them in here. So what we're doing is we're setting a type of our graph using the keyword argument of kind, then setting a title, a Y label, and an X label. Finally, what we will now need to do is this will create the plot, but we're not doing anything with that plot yet. Locally, you might want to show this on your screen when you execute this Python command. But in our case, what we want to do, because we may want to automate this in the future, let's just save this file into our file manager. To do that, we will say save fig, and then we can name it whatever we want. So we will name it myplot.png. Awesome. So that should create the graph, and it should have it formatted in a way that we can understand what's going on. Now, let's go down to our terminal, and we will say pip install and read our requirements. Once we execute this, this should Once we execute this, it should get all those requirements from our requirements.txt into our terminal. We'll give it just a second to finish installing those. And as you see, it finished installing. We will now execute our Python script. We called it graphmaker.py, and that should create a new file in our file manager. You see that I made a slight error right here. I am using the wrong object here. I'm using the data frame. Instead, we need to use this import that we have here, plt. So fixing that, plt, and we will execute this once more, and hopefully this time we get that file over here in the left, which we get here. So WayScript doesn't support viewing this file. I will run this locally. That way you can see what's going on, and we can view it in over here. So if you're running this locally, like how I was saying earlier, you might want to do plt.show, and we will execute this locally so we can see the graph. This is what that figure is inside of WayScript. So now at this point, if you want to do more with it, what you could do is host this using a Flash server or anything else. And WayScript supports hosting these graphs very easily. And if you want to see a tutorial on those, please let me know and I'll be happy to make that as well. But if you have any questions on this one, please let me know that as well in the comments, and I'll see you next time.